So point of view is at the foundation of pretty much everything you write, so it's really important to get it right, or else it'll throw your whole book out of whack. What we're doing today is we're looking at 7 common errors that a lot of writers make when they're writing in the third person, and we're going to diagnose them. I'm gonna show you a whole bunch of examples so you know exactly what I'm talking about, and then I'm gonna show you how to make sure you can avoid them and what to do instead. You're gonna wanna watch all of this video, just trust me on that one. So if you're ready, let's get started with mistake number 1, the soft head hop. So everyone warns about head hopping, right? And you know what this is. It's when you jump from one character's head into another character's head within the same scene without a chapter break or a scene break. But nobody really warns writers about the softer version of the head hop mistake. This is when you're staying in the same character's point of view, but you smuggle in some kind of information that they wouldn't know for some reason. And what this does is it really violates the reader's trust, and it just makes them feel uneasy, like something's off in this scenario. And I'll give you a great example of this, which I would bet like 70% of you have actually done at some point. Say you're writing in the limited third person and you describe the facial expressions of your point of view character, like a smile tugged at her lips. So hold on there. How would that point of view character know what her own smile looks like? No, you have just broken POV. You're giving us the perspective of someone else looking at her. You're not having her experiencing the scene. Now, if you're writing third person omniscient, then hey, go ahead, right? That's more like a camera, and it can look at every single one of the characters and even inside every single one of the characters and tell us what's going on. But the real problem is when you start with limited third and then suddenly you sneak in some omniscient knowledge. Let me give you really quick an example of someone who does this well in their book, and that would be Sally Rooney, Normal People. So every single chapter, Rooney is switching point of view, limited third with the girl and then limited third with the boy. And she stays very strictly inside each character's head for that chapter. So when it's Marianne's chapter, we're only getting her internal thoughts and we never get Connell's thoughts. And when it's Connell's chapter, we're only getting his thoughts and we never get Marianne's thoughts. And Rooney never shows the facial expressions of the point of view character. So, hey, don't do that in your books. And now it is time for mistake number 2, which is psychic distance fumble. So psychic distance is a term made up by John Gardner, and it describes the distance between the reader and your characters. Sometimes the gap between them is really, really large, like it was winter of the year 1853. Okay, that's a lot of psychic distance. We're getting information about the weather and the year, but we're not hearing a character's specific thoughts. Compare that to very close psychic distance, like, oh man, she hated Tuesdays. Now we're inside the brain of a character hearing them think. Now, the biggest question I get with this is, can I change psychic distance as I'm writing my story? And the answer is yes, to a degree. Normally you're, say, inside a character's brain and then flow slightly outwards to describe, say, a scene, or you're a very omniscient narrator, but then sometimes you show some character thoughts as well. Overall, though, I mean, there's nothing wrong with picking a certain psychic distance and sticking with that for the majority of your novel. For an example of this, we're going to look at A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This is probably one of the most difficult books in the world to read. And it's not just because of the subject matter, although it is the subject matter, but it's also because of the point of view. The reader has this suffocating closeness to the main character, Jude. The psychic distance is really, really short. So if you had horrible things happening and the psychic distance was great, the reader could remove themselves and be like, well, I'm not affected by that, you know? But when the psychic distance is so close and we're inside Jude's brain, like say in this example, look how close this is to him, right? We're literally inside his brain in this moment. When it is that close, there's no reprieve for the reader. It's almost like we're experiencing the torturous things he goes through with him. It's happening to the reader as well. So close psychic distance can be a really good technique to make the reader feel involved in your story. On the other hand, you can use psychic distance, which is much further away, to go for humor or to tell a lot of different sides of the same story. So, you know, both have their own application. Also, if you want to work through your novel novel with a mentor and a group of other writers on the same journey, that is what BookFox Lab is for. You will get weekly feedback on your writing, you will get one-on-one time with your mentor giving you advice, and you will get weekly craft chats with me where I do deep dives on all sorts of storytelling techniques. The link is in the description, so check that out if you want some help with your book. The third mistake that we're going to talk about is the camera eye trap. The camera eye trap is when you're writing in the third person and you're only showing what a camera would see. So the description of the place, the description of the person, what dialogue is spoken aloud, what actions are happening. But there's nothing about interiority. There's nothing about what the character is thinking or feeling. Now, if you watch a lot of movies and maybe read fewer books than you watch movies, then this is a trap that your cinematic brain will often fall into. Because movies, by and large, don't go into characters' brains. It is all on the surface. You're just seeing what characters do. However, when you are writing fiction, when you are writing a book, to skip over internals is losing one of the best things about what a novel can do. It's kind of like the superpower of books, like, yay, I get to get inside a human's brain. So what I'd recommend is make sure you are doing book first writing rather than movie as book writing. Now, are there some exceptions to this? I mean, yeah, of course, as with anything. I think of, say, some Hemingway or early Carver as being mostly camera eye technique. But I'd say for the vast majority of writers out there, including most of you watching this very video, you want to avoid only camera eye because it limits what you can do. A really fun example of this is No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. So the villain, Shigur, we only get camera eye with him, so we don't get inside of his brain very much, which honestly is kind of relieving because he's kind of a monstrous character. And it would probably feel awful to the reader to be inside his brain. But Sheriff Bell, on the other hand, is very interior rich. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think it actually switches to the first person in parts. We're getting all sorts of the sheriff's thoughts on the nature of good and evil, and it's very intimate. So I think the takeaway from this is that Cormac knows when to switch between the more camera eye focus, which is more external, and then a more interior focused point of view where we get let inside the character's brain. This next mistake sounds super complex, but do not be afraid. I am going to break it down for you. It is mistake number 4. Free indirect discourse sabotage. Ooh, that was a mouthful. And you're probably thinking like, is this video too complex for me? Should I quit watching now? And no, let me explain very simply what this means. Free indirect discourse is basically third person, but with the essence of a first person narrator, like that intimate and conversational. And what free indirect discourse does is it allows you to put the thoughts of your characters on the page without doing two things. One, having some sort of attribution tag of she thought or he felt. And 2, without italics, because sometimes authors like to use italics to be like, hey, here's a thought from the author, not from the omniscient narrator, which, you know, for some POVs that's necessary, but in free indirect discourse, it's not necessary. You're just giving the thoughts of the character, and everything is the thoughts of the character, so you don't need to italicize them. So the real danger here is that you create a barrier between the readers and the characters when you have either italics or when you have he thought, she thought sort of phrases. The reader's gonna feel further away from the story when you do things like that. However, if you do have a really strong or distant omniscient narrator, then yes, you do need to have those thought attributions or use italics, because that helps the reader understand when the narrator is talking and when the character is thinking. And, you know, that division actually is helpful. So a quick example of some attribution tags from All the Light We Cannot See with Anthony Doerr. Werner goes out, looks back at the house, bone white in the failing light. He thinks of the kitchen cupboard with its strange potions. Okay, so here we get this little attribution of he thinks, so we're aware that it's him thinking this and not the omniscient narrator just directing us toward it. Okay, now for an example of free indirect discourse from Jane Austen's Emma. So read this little paragraph and pause the video if you need some extra time. Can you sense that these are the character's direct thoughts? We're getting them sort of unmediated in the text. There's no she thought it was a bad business. It was just it was a bad business. That's not the omniscient narrator thinking that, that's the character thinking that. And we hear the process of her thinking. How could she have done otherwise? And thinking like, impossible. Hey, in these videos, I try to deliver really practical advice that you can use in your manuscript today. If you're getting something out of this video right now, please go ahead and subscribe or, like it if you've already subscribed. That will help make sure that you get to watch the next video I release. This next mistake, it's such a tricky one. It's so hard to avoid. It is mistake number 5. Pronoun fog. If you're writing in third person and there are 4 women in a room, it starts to get really confusing when you're using pronouns. She did that, she did this. We're like, who are we talking about? And most writers end up managing it in clunky ways. That's the nice way to put it. Because when you just repeat the character's name every single time they have an action, the story starts to get bogged down by all these character names, literally weighted by all the syllables. But then what's the alternative of that? Oh, making the reader confused about who is saying what and who is doing what? I mean, that's not a good option either. So I think the best solution in this scenario is simply to very strategically use action tags. So when you have a character do something, an action, a gesture, a movement, right before there's dialogue, you don't need dialogue tag. Right? Because we instinctually know like, oh, this must be them saying that because we just mentioned them the sentence beforehand. So compare these 2 examples. James grabbed the knife. Why don't we just slice them all up? Or James grabbed the knife. Why don't we just slice them up? He said. You see how you don't need that he said on the end? So giving your characters action in a particular scene really helps keep the clutter out of your prose. So a great example of how to navigate this well is Bret Easton Ellis's Less Than Zero. He has a lot of long scenes with multiple characters in them. And I think the first thing he does well is just make each character sound unique. So that way we can tell who's speaking. We don't need like James said, but also he just gives little clues about who might be doing something, so he's not constantly repeating all these character names. This next point is my absolute favorite one in this video. It is mistake number 6, the non-omniscient omniscient. So you should know the difference between third person limited and omniscient by now, but if not, third person limited is just when we're very close inside one character's head, and omniscient is, an outside narrator telling us this whole story. But not as many writers really understand the difference between low omniscience and high omniscience. Low omniscience is when the narrator can go into anybody's mind, but they're not really telling us about what the future holds. They don't have any specific opinions themselves. They're just sort of like relaying what's happening. While high omniscience, on the other hand, is someone who is all-knowing and all-seeing, and they know everything about this story in the future and in the past, and they do have opinions, and they can weigh in on what's actually happening and commentate on things. Now, there's nothing wrong with either low omniscience or high omniscience, but I do have to say that sometimes with low omniscience, I'm wondering like, well, why didn't we just write this in third person, right? What are you getting out of having this be the omniscient narrator? Almost like this point of view is kind of a default rather than the writer making a distinct decision. So let me give you a couple examples of books that employ high omniscience and what that looks like and what you can do with it. A lot of Jose Saramago's writing is very high omniscient, very opinionated, very omniscient narrator forward. Look at this example from his book Blindness. So he has people walking on a crosswalk, and suddenly the narrator sort of gets this attitude, and he was like, people call this a zebra, but guess what? It doesn't look like a zebra. So the omniscient narrator has a personality. They have opinions. They're weighing in on things in the story. And my recommendation, if you try to pull that off, is to make sure that it's even throughout the whole story, right? Don't just do it once. Make sure that's the narrator's voice on every single page of the book. A second example of a very high omniscient or distant storyteller would be Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. So the narrator here is sort of weighing in with humor and historical irony throughout. Look at this example. We are not inside the character's brain. This is very much an outside narrator telling us like what exactly we should think about this woman. Oh, she has the demeanor of someone who's decidedly not average. I guess what I'm really saying is if you're going to do omniscient, you might as well take advantage of what omniscience can do. It doesn't make any sense to choose omniscience and then be like, I'm going to shackle myself and create all these restrictions and not have the omniscient narrator really do anything. If you're going to have those type of limitations, then why not just go for first person or third person limited? Okay, now we're getting to our last mistake, and honestly, this is probably the most common error out there. It is number 7. Filter word overdose. So filter words really are just an absolute mess when you're writing limited third person. And what are filter words? She saw, he noticed, she felt, she heard. And what filter words do is they remind the reader that they are hearing about someone else's perception of the world rather than just experiencing that perception in a very organic way. It's like the difference between, say, playing an arcade game where it's like you and the machine and you're fiddling with, the little controls and everything, versus a VR experience where all you're seeing is the actual world of the game, and there's very little distance between you and the game. And what a lot of filter usage does is it makes limited third person feel more like omniscient third. Now, little caveat before you comb through your entire book and delete all of these, sometimes they are useful. You shouldn't delete every single one of them. Sometimes you need to say she realized if it is a really big epiphany. Sometimes you need to say he remembered as a way of getting into his memory. This is one of those rules where it's like, 70% of the time, if you cut this, the reader's going to have a better experience with your book. And quick example of this from Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. She is someone who cuts a lot of filter words out and gives us this very direct, immediate experience. So here we have a guy observing a girl's sweatshirt and noticing there are stains on it. The first version here just says what he's seeing. And then I added the filter words on the second one so you could see what it would look like. He saw that her MIT sweatshirt had these stains on it. If you just cut out the he saw that and just present what it was he saw, the sentence is much stronger, and honestly, the paragraph is much stronger. Do not forget that you can click on the links for Bookfox Academy and Bookfox Lab below, which, it's just getting to know me better, getting to see my face some more with all those videos, or getting some more interaction with me in Bookfox Lab. You get to hang out with me. That's pretty cool. And also, learn a lot about writing. So, hey, if you can do one of those, please do. Otherwise, thanks for joining me for this video, and I hope you have a great writing week.